Hey everyone, welcome to the Bible study. I am joined today by...
Mark Clark, y'all.
Yeah.
Don't know why they call me a name that rhymes, but we'll just go with it for now. 41 years in.
Great to have you, Mark,
Hey,
in
thank
person.
You, sir. Yes, indeed. Yes.
You're down in, we're going to timestamp this, rainy California.
Yes, it did rain today. I was told that it doesn't rain here. You know,
Yeah.
I decided through discernment to move from Vancouver to California to come work with you guys. And the first day I'm here, it rains. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know if it's the family curse. I don't know.
It's
Promises
Vancouver.
were made that aren't
it's
legitimate.
It's the Canadian blessing. That's what he brought everybody.
Yes.
So, hey, great to have Mark here and great to have you here. We are in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and we always say this. Why don't you like, subscribe, share, do all of that? Because people need to hear the truth today. So, Mark, we are in an incredible chapter, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, everybody. And this is one of the pivotal chapters in the New Testament, especially in the area of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so if you want to know what the gospel is, what is key to the gospel, how to actually defend the gospel, this is an episode of the Bible study that you must listen to. Actually, this is probably the longest chapter in the Bible on the resurrection of Jesus, longer than any of the gospel accounts. It goes into the theology of the resurrection, what it means to us, and Paul just grabs it and he brings us to the hope of eternity. But Mark, it all starts with the gospel. I mean, like right from verse 1, Paul says, now brothers and sisters, I want to remind you of the gospel. And I think, you know, in the world, in the age that we're living in today, that very line is so important, and I'm going to say for the Western church, that we would be reminded of what the gospel really is.
Yeah, and it's the Greek word, you know, the word for gospel is euangelion, which is this word back then that meant good news. And like Caesar would use it, right? It wasn't like a Bible word. Like we use it as a church word.
Yes.
But Caesar would use it when he would want to proclaim a victory that he'd had over, you know, I took this city, I took this whatever, and now let my people go in and triumph everybody. Like, this is the good news of Caesar. He's taken over this territory, and now Paul grabs it and he goes, no, Caesar's, you know, Jesus is actual Lord, and let me explain to you the greatest news. And the cool thing is, it's news. It's not advice. It's an announcement of something. It's a heralding of something. It's not like, so Jesus lived a perfect life, died on the cross, rose again. What do you think? It's like, no, this happened.
Yeah.
So like, build your life around it. But I'm not asking you what you think.
It's proclamation.
It's beautiful.
Okay, that's great. So it's the gospel, and let's just read 3 and 4, verses 3 and 4, and then you're going to dive right into this. But one commentator said this is possibly the most important sentence that has ever been written. You ready for this? Paul says this, for what I received, I passed on to you as of, I love this here, first importance. Like, there's stuff in the Bible that's important. But I think even Paul is going to hear, this is primary doctrine and theology right here. First importance. And here's the big line, everybody. You ready? That Christ died, so he definitely died, for our what? For our sins, and I love this, according to the scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day, according to the scriptures. And a few things here that are just jumping out to me, Mark, immediately. He definitely died, he was definitely buried, and he was definitely raised from the dead. And all of this according to the scriptures. What do you think Paul's getting at here?
So we can spend,
weeks on this.
2 hours on this. Man, so first off, like you said, the first importance piece. Oftentimes the church kind of talks about gospel stuff, and we use this word, but sometimes people don't actually know what it means. Like if you sat someone down for coffee and said, okay, so the gospel is what saves you. What is the gospel? Reiterate it. And you took 10 Christians and put them in a room. You might actually get different answers. You might get, well, you know, God loved us and he did some stuff, or, you know, God thinks you're a good person, or you're sinful. And and this is a way to go to heaven when you die. Like there'd be all kinds of different variations of what people actually think the center of the center, as Martin Luther talked about. What is the center of the actual biblical story? And we would say it's the gospel. And so what we're saying and why this is such an important couple verses is because literally when someone looks at me, whether I'm talking to pastors, preachers, leaders, whatever, and they go, so what is the gospel then? Because we have to talk about this idea of like, well, you're going to preach a sermon, make sure it's a gospel-centered sermon. If you're going to do ministry, make sure it's gospel-centered ministry. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Does it mean just God?
Yeah.
I point people to this text. And I go, you want the best summary of the gospel in the New Testament? I think it's here, Romans 3, where you literally have all these elements that Christ...
Yes.
It's Christocentric. It's about Jesus. It's not about you, primarily. But that's how we tend to start.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you're sinful, and then this is what God did about it. But actually, this is actually a Christological message. It's something about Jesus.
Yeah.
By implication, it's about us. But it's about Christ and then something about him. He died, of course, which is a kind of throwaway line, but if you got a pen, you should probably underline that because he died. So Muslims, for instance, wouldn't think that Jesus died on the cross. He kind of swooned in and out, and there's different religions and ideas. No, gospel says no, he died. He actually died for this reason. He died. He didn't just die because dying, everyone does that, for our sins.
Yeah.
There was this thing he died for, and then we could just sit there for an hour. Our sins. What does that mean? The word sins and missing the target, and why is he doing this? And you were just talking about in your devos, you're doing reading Leviticus right now.
Yeah.
It's like, look at all the things Israel did for the redemption from sins, for the atonement of sins. And here's what Jesus does, and it's according to the scriptures, of course. It's the whole biblical story is about this. Any passage, any book you're in the entire Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, is about this story. It's about this person. Whether you're in Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Jonah, whatever it is, it's about Jesus and what he did to rescue sinners. And then, of course, that he was raised. If we get up and preach a sermon, Andrew, and we say, hey, guys, Jesus died for your sins, we haven't preached the gospel yet.
Yeah.
Every sermon in the book of Acts includes the resurrection. See, you could have a guy die for people, but that's like, okay.
Yeah.
So Gandhi did that. He was like, I'll be an example.
Yes.
But that's actually not a great, if all you do is just die and it's like, okay, he's dead. He rose again. And that's where the power of the gospel comes in.
Yes.
This thing that he accomplished now is seen in the resurrection, and there's power for us. So that's where it all kind of comes together.
I heard one commentator say this, Mark. The glory of the gospel is not that Jesus is alive, but that he is risen.
Yeah, that's good.
That's like the genius element of this, that he defeated death. And we're going to come to that in the fullness of the text.
Yeah.
And I love this idea, too, of the according to the scriptures.
Yeah.
And what a moment will be like in heaven. Go, Paul, tell us exactly what scriptures you were thinking of at that moment in time. Or to watch the DVD or the Netflix episode of Jesus walking on the road to Emmaus with the two disciples and explaining to them according to the scriptures.
Yeah, it's so interesting because oftentimes, like, I really believe in this kind of interpretive idea that any passage in the scriptures is ultimately about Jesus.
Yeah.
But that's hard sometimes. So even when I'm like working with preachers and they're like, well, what do you mean? What am I supposed to do? Just go, well, Jesus is just like this plant here, in Numbers 6, Jesus is the true and better leaf. No, it's like deeper than that. I think a great example of this, if you're looking for one about what this kind of means, is go to Ephesians chapter 5. And you see Paul, and he's talking about the mystery of marriage. And he's like, this is a great mystery. I don't want you to be ignorant of this, that, Christ, it's this idea that a man will leave his mother and father and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And he quotes Genesis 2. But then he says, here's the mystery of this text. This is about Christ and the church.
Church, yes.
And then you go, what do you mean? That was a passage about Genesis 2 where God is making Adam, he makes Eve, and then he says, here's the structure of marriage. A man will leave his mother and father, be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And then Paul, in light of Jesus' death and resurrection, goes, whoa, hold on. This was never just about Adam and Eve. This was about the fact that there will come a day when the true Adam will leave his father in heaven, come down and do a work that will unite him to his wife, the church, and the two will become one flesh. He's reading the Christ story back into Genesis 2. That's crazy. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Because now we, the church, are Eve being united to Jesus, and Jesus had to literally leave his own father to come and rescue us. And so that's what Paul means by according to the scriptures. Every single story is about this story.
Yeah.
About how God is rescuing the world through Jesus.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. Mark, we've got 58 verses to get through in the next few minutes.
Yeah.
And come on, do your best and take us on a tour of the text.
Okay. A little tour would be, so he starts with the gospel, and then you hit a bunch of verses, which I'm not going to spend much time on at all, which I could and would love to. He talks about the resurrection of Jesus, of course. Verse 20, but Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits. But here's his main theme, though. A huge part of this theme isn't just about the death and resurrection of Jesus. Of course, he spends a ton of verses on that. But it's actually about our resurrection. And that's where these 58 verses are so interesting. Because in no other passage in the Bible does the Bible stop and go, so what is that going to be like? I mean, there's hints to it in Romans 8. There's hints to it in Philippians 3. But 1 Corinthians 15 is the most kind of, let me stop and explain what your future is going to be like. And so Paul starts to talk about, verse 35. Someone will ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body will they come? How foolish. What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. When you sow, you do not plant the body that will be, but just a seed, perhaps of wheat or of something else. But God gives it a body as he has determined. To each kind of seed, he gives its own body. And then he starts to go into this verse 40. There are also heavenly bodies and there are earthly bodies, but the splendor of the heavenly bodies is one kind and the splendor of the earthly bodies is another. The sun has one kind of splendor, the moon another, the stars another, and the stars different from the sun. So will it be with the resurrection of the dead? The body that is sown is perishable. It is raised imperishable. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. It is sown a natural body. It is raised a spiritual body. This is Paul going, the hope of the Christian message to the world, which is actually interestingly unique because sometimes we don't really sit down with our friends and explain it this way, is not just going to heaven when you die. It's actually a new creation. It's a re-physicality. It is a very kind of dualistic or Platonic version of Christianity that kind of seeped in through the Middle Ages within Christianity that made it, physical body, physical world bad, spirit world good. Let's give everybody a message about how we can shuffle off this mortal coil, as Shakespeare said, and go to heaven when we die. And then that's basically our message. How do I get my neighbor to heaven when they die? That's never the biblical view. It's that heaven is going to come down and be remarried to earth, and our future is a resurrected earth. Our future is physical. And so the reason you can't get excited for a non-physical future, where you're like, oh, awesome, I'm in a Big Apple store, everything's white, I'm a non-physical being, and I'm singing, I guess, forever. The reason you're like, yeah, I don't know. There's like Mormon versions of heaven that sound funner than that. Or Muslim, version. There's all these other versions that sound funner. It's because you don't have an appetite. This is very important. You don't have an appetite for a non-physical existence because you were made to be physical. Physical isn't bad. Physical got corrupted, but physical is going to be restored, not abandoned. And I think this is what we have to hold on to. As one writer has said, trying to get a desire for a non-physical future for yourself is like trying to get an appetite to eat sand. Because you want to feel the grass between your toes. You want to like reach out and touch. You want color. You want mountains and like all this stuff, like all this like beautiful thing that kind of gets our soul all jacked up. We've been pitched a version like, nope. 1 Corinthians 15 is the chapter that goes, guys, no, like literally, this is your future. It's physical again. It's just a kind of physical that's a glory. It's not the same kind of physical that we experience now with dishonor, the words he uses, weakness, natural, perishable. It's all the opposite of those things. It's eternal. It's like full of pleasure and delight to the point that everything we see in this world that's like pleasurable is just a little grass growing up through concrete. It's a hint toward this kind of existence. It's crazy. When we see the resurrected Jesus in the gospel narratives, we see him in John 20, 19, 20, 21. He's doing all these physical things. They look at him and you're cooking fish on the beach and he's going through walls, but then he's physical and they want to touch him and it's very interesting. One writer has said there's a continuity and a discontinuity with Jesus' old life and his new life. He's still physical, but he's physical in a way that's like glorified. And he's like this new heaven, this new earth, this new creation. It's going to be like a party that we kind of went, of course it's like this, but then it's like way different than we thought. And there's going to be a kind of pleasure that we never could have dreamed of. So I think this is what Paul is trying to get at. He's trying to say, listen, your future is, everyone's future in some ways, who's a Christian, is physical, but physical in a glorified state versus a perishable, weak, depressed state. And that kind of physicality is going to be a kind of glory that we can never imagine. And the way that it was accomplished for us was through the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so what awaits you is a resurrected earth, not... The best book I've read on this is probably, I don't know if you've read the book by Randy Alcorn called Heaven. It's literally this thick, and it's just answering will there be space travel? Will we learn stuff? Will there be music? Will there be art? These are amazing questions to ask. Because it's like, I think we just picture heaven as like, it's complete.
Yeah.
It's done. There's nothing left to do. But then there's these great parables where it's like Jesus goes, you know, if you do things, you know, if you're good with the $5, I'm going to give you the 10. And if you, and then he goes, you're going to rule over, if you know, you rule over one city well, I'm going to give you 20 cities. Yeah. And Dallas Willard asked that great question where he's like, instead of just asking the question if you're going to go to heaven when you die, you might want to ask the question about what you're doing right now on earth would help you rule over Liverpool or Baltimore better because you're going to be given cities and things to do.
Yeah.
In the new creation.
Mark, maybe take a minute here and try and explain to some of our viewers, you know, the gnostic version, because they didn't really in the body. So you just, if I feel sexy, I have sex, or feel hungry, I have a hunger.
Sure.
They didn't look at the body or value it much.
Right.
And it's almost like the thing here as well, I think people are what Paul's trying to get at is like the acorn compared to the oak tree. It's like they're just looking at the body going, you know, insignificant, weak, and obviously the older we get, and no matter how much time you spend on the Peloton, gravity is doing its work. I mean, everything's going south. It's just, it's not working. And they're just looking at the body bad. I want rid of this thing. But acorn to oak tree, Gnosticism. Do you want to explain that just a little bit?
Yeah, I think that what happens is it's actually interesting because in that time, they had this view that spirit world good, flesh world bad. And it's very interesting that that's kind of come full circle. If you think about the conversations we're having right now about identity, what we've done is we've kind of come full circle and we've said this: your physical self has no bearing on who you are. You can't trust your gender, for instance, based on the body that you've been given. You have to go internally into yourself.
That's very good.
That's Gnosticism. And Christianity would come along and go, wait. Whoa. Yes, the Christian version we've been selling, which is physical world bad, spiritual world good, might actually lead us to that. Because we devalued the physical and said, there's no hint toward your identity, these old bodies. Let's just shuck them off and move on with our life.
Yeah.
Let's go inside and see how we feel about stuff. We've elevated that. That actually feeds into Gnosticism versus the Judeo-Christian version, which is the physical is good.
So
God made all that he saw, and he said, this is good. This is very good. This is physical. And if the story was, I made a physical world, Satan came in, created sin, so now the story is get everybody into a disembodied world, then God loses. But the story's way better.
Yeah.
He's like, no, I'm not going to give up the physical and change the rules. I'm going to actually stick with winning the physical back through the death and resurrection of Jesus that puts the physical back into order in this glorified way that no one ever thought of. And so looking at our bodies, this is one of the things I think Christians can offer into the conversation that culture is having. Looking at our bodies as actually indicators of who we are is actually super important and shouldn't be shoved aside. The physical creation is a pointer, a corrupt one, a perishable one, but still an indicator to our identity. And the minute we push it aside, we're left with how you feel about yourself, which is the prioritization of psychology over science, over a bunch of things, a bunch of disciplines that have been really the priority for, 1,000 years. And then all of a sudden, 200 years ago, we went, no, it's all about psychology and how you feel and your internal thinking. This brings us back to that.
That's fantastic.
Right? And goes, Gnosticism will leave you to a place. So literally the word gnosis is the word for knowledge, the Greek word for knowledge. So Gnosticism was this, if I could get a secret knowledge about the mystery of the universe, it'll just be knowledge that will save me. It'll be information that will save me. And the physical world has nothing to offer me in regard to that mystery. So I need to go into some esoteric spiritual world of trances and mantras that's separated from the physical world. And in that moment, you lose it.
Wow. This
is why Lewis talked about the idea of we fool ourselves when we don't think the physical posture of ourselves during prayer matters. And isn't this kind of classically kind of like modern evangelicalism? Don't worry about what you're doing, just do whatever. And there's something about like Lewis back then in the 50s, like kneeling beside his bed as this 40-year-old man going, I think my physical posture is feeding something. Which is communion. It's think about what communion is. It's like a reestablishment of the physical.
Yeah,
it's incredible. It's about body, blood, touch, smell, feel stuff. This matters. Anyway,
so the Gnostics are saying, get out of the body and you'll get elevation.
Yeah.
Well, Paul's saying, no, the body's part of the elevation.
Yeah.
Actually, it'll be summoned.
Yeah.
So, Mark, how does that work? The great trumpet call, okay? Where the dead in Christ shall be raised, okay?
In a flash, in the twinkling of an eye.
And then I'm going to bring you back to verse 12. But I want to do this here.
Yeah.
So what happens in that moment? The trumpet call comes. And what happens, okay? I'm trusting that if I'm not raptured, that's a whole talk in itself,
right,
okay?
Yes.
If I'm not raptured, that I die in peace one day on my lazy boy. And Isabel's grandmother went to the French market in the morning. She bought her produce. She cooked a great lunch. She sat in her lazy boy. Boom.
Dude,
she
that
went.
Is the way
that
to
is like,
go.
yeah, Lord, I would order that on Amazon today. Not for next week, but for years to come. Okay, and I just want to be put in the box, a recyclable one. Put in the box, put in the earth. Hear the trump. What about the person who is ashes is being cremated? How does the Lord?
It all works. So verse 51. This is what you're talking about. Listen, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep. We will all be changed in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound and the dead will be raised imperishable and we will be changed. So the idea is, and I love this verse, for the imperishable must clothe itself, or the perishable must clothe itself with the imperishable. People lost at sea, people lost in fires, God resurrects. If God can create the universe, he can resurrect, the physical bodies no matter, because, again, as C.S. Lewis, who I've read so much on this, and this is why he's in my head on this, in his book Miracles talks about this very idea. He talks about the idea that DNA is all being shared. Like matter your body basically rejuvenates like atoms like every 7 years. Like we're all sharing, he says, we're all sharing atoms and matter with dogs and dinosaurs. There's a certain amount of matter in the universe, and it's all getting traded
it's the dust.
out. Yeah, it's the dust. We're stardust in that way, not in a New Age way, but it's like there's a certain amount of matter in the universe, and we're trading out things with dogs and dinosaurs and people who lived 10,000 years ago. So God takes all of that and of course uses it. You don't, if you die in a fire, it's not like God's like, oh shoot, I can't get Andrew resurrected. Anyway, he had a shot. That's not how it works. All the bodies get resurrected, some unto salvation, some unto judgment. And what he's talking about here is this perishable, again, picture Jesus as the prototype for this re-physicality.
First fruits.
He dies, he gets raised, he then can like appear in places and you know, Luke 24, he's walking along, they don't even recognize him. Now it could just mean he shaved his head, but it probably means like he's doing some incognito thing. Like, can he shift around? I don't know what's going on. Yeah. There's some kind of mode of existence, mode of being. And so one writer talks about, he says there's life after death, which is like when we die, you know, if we're a Christian, we go to like paradise and the spirit realm. But then that's the intermediate state. And then there's the final state, which is what this writer calls life after death, which is that's the final state where we're resurrected and then we're in union in this new creation with Christ, and it's a beautiful thing. So, yes, God can take care of all the people lost at sea and been burned up through history and all the rest of it. And he raises everyone, and we live in this new mode of existence, which at the center of it, as the Psalms say, is delight forevermore, which is, I think, one of the most beautiful parts about this thing.
Yeah. So until that moment, Mark, until the resurrection of the dead, the people that have died, okay, and until the bodily resurrection, we can hear some of our viewers, what am I doing then at that moment? What about the in-between until this, like, incredible resurrection?
Yeah, there's all kinds of debate about this. There's people who talk about soul sleep and stuff. I don't think that's probably where it goes. I think we are conscious in you know, Jesus said to the guy on the cross, today you will join me in paradise. And so I think there's some paradise version of this, or a hell version for those who don't trust Christ. And then there's the kind of final day of judgment. And then there's when, you know, death and Hades gets thrown into the lake of fire, kind of final judgment idea. And then those who have been resurrected unto life have this new heaven, new earth to live in forever. But in the meantime, it's some kind of beautiful, you know, Paul in Philippians, it's better for me to depart and actually, you know, go to be with Christ, absent from the body, present with the Lord, than to just continue on, you know, hanging out and being a human being forever. And, you know, it's fascinating, right? Like, these guys are writing these letters at a time where, what's the average age? Probably they're all dying by the time they're 30. Yeah. Like, we got to think, like,
of course,
all through history, these guys are all dying, like dead by the time they're 40. We're all living to like 90 now.
Yeah,
we're just like, you know.
I went to Mozambique and the average life is 37 at that point.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? We don't think like.
Yeah.
But like, go watch Braveheart or something. And, everyone's 24 getting a hammer to the head, and that's how you go.
That's when you live beside the English. That's what happens. Love you, London. Okay, so Mark, I'm gonna bring you back to verse 12, but before that, shameless plug. Okay, I'm here as Mark's PR guy. He asked me to do this earlier on. So if you want to find out more about the resurrection of Jesus, because what we're doing here, what Paul does, he's taking the resurrection of Jesus as the foundation of the resurrection of every single Christian. But if you're going, hey, I want to know more about the resurrection of Jesus, in Mark's book, The Problem of Jesus, and also in his book, The Problem of God, he has a whole chapter on the resurrection. So if you're watching and you're going, do you know what? I'm not sure if I can believe this stuff. They're talking about resurrection. Was Jesus even resurrected? I encourage you, order this book today and The Problem of God. Read the chapters. And if you're going, I want to know even more about it, order N.T. Wright's book, The Resurrection of the Son of God. It's 800 pages from possibly the foremost authority on the New Testament alive today. Okay? So don't just go, you can't believe that stuff. We're talking about some smart people that have taken the time, put pen to paper. There is an account for all of this. However, back to our chapter, Mark, verse 12. So some people are going, Paul has written to the church and he has covered so much. He's covered incest in the church, proper sexual activity in the church, division in the church, just public worship in the church. And then it's almost after spiritual gifts. He just goes, in chapter 14, on how we should operate spiritual gifts. He goes, I'm going to bring you back to the gospel.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do a chapter, 58 verses, he didn't know it was that, on the resurrection. And verse 12 seems to be a key on why he takes this sort of right turn. But if it has been preached, that Christ has been raised from the dead, how can some of you say? So obviously he's getting word back that there is no resurrection of the dead. And he goes into this point where he just goes, come on, if there's no resurrection, we're all in trouble.
Right.
Why you wrote the book,
Yeah.
why N.T. Wright did all of that stuff, we're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, I think what he's doing goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is, of course you're going to have perverse sexuality where he needs to spend 3 to 4 chapters, at least 3 chapters, talking about sexuality over and over and over again. If you think your physical body doesn't matter.
Temple of the Holy Spirit.
Right?
Yeah.
If my physical body doesn't matter, then I can sleep with a prostitute and it doesn't matter. I can sleep around. That's literally the Gnosticism of our day. I can sleep with anyone, not be married to them, doesn't matter because the physical is nothing. And he goes out of his way going, God, no, you can't sleep with your stepmom. You can't sleep with prostitutes. You can't sleep with this. You can't sleep with that. Why? He's coming back to it here going, guys, the physical body matters. Let me give you 58 verses on it. It mattered in Jesus' context, and it matters in yours, so knock it off. Knock off the things you're doing with your physical body. But yes, they of course rejected the concept because one of the things N.T. Wright talks about in that great book, which actually is such a fascinating, Tim Keller, he's a pastor in New York City and for years, and one of the guys we read and respect a lot. He had cancer back in like 2004, I think at the time. He's got it again, but this was a different kind of cancer. And he was in the hospital. He had to get surgery, and he had to get to... And he sat and read that 800-page tome by N.T. Wright and the Resurrection of the Son of God in a hospital bed for like 2 weeks. And he said, when I closed it, as a pastor, I went into that surgery knowing conceptually that the resurrection was legitimate. But when I was done that book, in the midst of my cancer treatment, I realized that in that moment, that's all I actually held on to was the concept that I would be resurrected from the dead. And when I closed that book, I actually believed it.
Wow.
Like in a different way than I thought I would, which was kind of cool. So I think that's what Paul's trying to say. You guys, in the ancient world, you got to remember, if you're a dualist... or a gnostic or a platonist, which are all these terms, which is physical bad, spiritual good. There's one of two ways you can look at things. The ancient kind of pagan world said there is no resurrection because why would you want to be resurrected when the physical world is bad? So we reject resurrection. Jews came along and said, we believe in resurrection, but it's not one person. It's the whole nation at the end of time. It's Ezekiel 36 and 37. It's the whole valley of dry bones, dem bones. They rise up collectively, the nation of Israel. It was absurd, the thought. Because this is what Paul now comes along and says. He goes, I got something else for you. I think one person, Israel's representative, Christ, the Christ is literally what that title meant, got resurrected in the middle of time to open up a whole new world for everybody, and it's messing with everybody. Because the Jews didn't have a concept for it, because it's always collective, and the pagans didn't have a concept for it because you wouldn't want resurrection to be true. Remember when you're reading the Gospels and it says the Sadducees, they didn't believe in the resurrection, and we got that old, that's why they're sad, you see. So the Pharisees believed in resurrection because they had some of the passages in the Old Testament because the Sadducees, remember, they only believed basically in Genesis to Deuteronomy. So they didn't believe in some of the prophets. So it's funny, actually, the Pharisees were seen as liberals in that culture, because the Sadducees were the conservatives who only took the
Torah.
law of Moses. It was these weak, progressive, liberal Pharisees that went, we believe in Ezekiel. And they went, no, that's the prophets aren't legitimate. Well, if you don't have Ezekiel, then you don't have a ton of resurrection. If all you're doing is Matthew to Deuteronomy, that's why the Gospels say the Sadducees didn't believe in resurrection, because they only paid attention to those first 5 books. So the Pharisees, of course, believed in it, but they believed in it as the nation at the end of time. And that's why basically he's saying, guys, the Christian version of this is a third way that blows everything up. But it's true because it happened in Jesus, and it's going to happen to all of us soon. So you've got to figure out what you're going to do in light of it.
Yeah. So it's important that we believe in the resurrection, because it's actually at the heart of the gospel.
Yes. That it actually happened. Not Jesus didn't rise from the dead in your heart.
Yeah.
Metaphorically. That's the progressive view. Right? It's like the progressive view today is, well, the Bible's not, miracles don't really happen. People don't rise from the dead. So this was a metaphor.
Yes.
It's the Christ-conscious story, the archetype that's written into all stories from the time we were drawing on walls. Seeds go into the ground. They come up alive. We all want to believe that, and this is the Christian version.
Right.
No, this is Paul going, no. This isn't an archetype. This actually historically happened.
Yeah. So it's key. It was obviously key to Christ, key to the gospel, but it's key to our future hope.
Yeah,
this is it's just everything. Yeah. It's just everything.
When you get that cancer diagnosis, when you lose that loved one, this is the hope. This is Paul's point in saying, verse 14, if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is our faith. And he goes on to say, we're to be the most pitied among people because we believe in a joke. We're believing in fantasy. This is the thing we hold on to that says, we don't know why bad things always happen to people. But as Keller talks about in one of his books, citing Lord of the Rings, he says, Gandalf looks at one point and he says, everything sad is going to come untrue. It's actually going to be reversed, rewound in some way, and restored. See, that's the beauty of the gospel. It's not just that something gets redeemed. It's that it actually gets restored in some way that we can't even fathom right now.
Yeah.
Like, you get it back, but it's better. That's the hope of Christianity.
It's fabulous, especially in this crazy world that we're living in today. What a hope, what a hope. So, Mark, I think also covering this, we've covered a lot of theology too, but just application. What does this all mean to our lives? We've covered things like our sexual activity, I think is really important, because the body is important. The physical's very important. I think even like terms of anxiety, this speaks to our world.
Yeah, because it says... those of us who are scared of anything, death, losing people, I've talked about this often. I don't love flying. I hate flying because usually when I'm flying, I'm away from my daughters. And I think that's why I don't love flying, even though statistically, if I get to the airport, I'm probably safe. But when I'm in that plane, I'm just always staring out the window. Like, I need to literally, my assistant needs to book me a seat by a window every time.
Right.
Because I just need to stare out the window if there's any turbulence. Like, I have this anxiety that comes about in my life. Now, it's probably the only thing I'm scared of.
Yeah.
Like, I literally, they say the top fear of anybody is, public speaking. That's whatever. Put me in front of 50,000, I don't care. Put me on a plane where statistically nothing's going to happen. For some reason, I'm scared. And this is 10 years old in my life. Ever since I had daughters, I'm this is the kind of thing that I come back to, though. So some of you are scared of dying. Some of you, this is the thing that goes, you don't have to be afraid of dying. This is why in the first century, when people are getting sick, the plague or whatever's going on in the first 300-400 years of the church, and the Romans are just kicking the pagans to the curb, it was the church. You see all these writings of pagans going, guys, the church is taking care of our sick, and they're getting sick and dying. But they're actually coming out and caring for them. And the Roman Empire is like, man, these people are crazy, which is why it went from 300 to 35 million Christians or something. Because they're like, look at these people. They're not afraid of death. And I think the reason they weren't afraid of death is because of this. They actually believed that Jesus rose from the dead, and they knew they were going to too.
Yeah.
And so the anxiety, the fear, the thing you're facing in life, if this is true, it's put in context. Not to say it quickly goes away, but this is the thing to apply to it. Don't apply, just be a good person and try some hacks in your life and you'll get better. It's like, if this is true, now you don't have to be scared.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Everyone, thanks for joining us. Just as Mark said there, I think send everyone away on a note of encouragement. Those early Christians, why were they so radical, Mark?
Yeah.
Well, they lived somewhere between the resurrection of Christ. Whether they had physically seen him or not, they knew someone who had. Paul said, there's 500, like they saw him at one time. But they lived literally on the strength of the resurrection, and they lived suspended between the the reality of the resurrection and the hope of Christ's return. They were thinking he could come back any time. Yeah. What a way to live. And I want to encourage you with all the questions and the answers, with everything. Come on, everyone. Let's live on the strength of the resurrection of the Son of God, but also the hope of his return. You know what to do. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you for the next episode.